I'm talking with former Genovese crime family mobster, my friend Anthony Arillotta. He was a made member of the Genovese Family's Massachusetts faction. And so, Anthony, you shared with me in our previous discussions that you grew up as a kid around gangsters coming into your town and using the back room of your family's business for their meetings when you were young. So you always knew of that life, but how did you initially get yourself involved in it?
Well, initially with the mafia itself.
Right.
I guess when I started to hit the streets, what happened was my father had a really successful fruit and vegetable. He was the biggest wine grape distributor in the Massachusetts area. He sold like 40 trailer loads of wine grapes every wine grape season. And he sold imported Italian pasta, olive oils, and everything. And so I would work with him as a young kid, younger, I don't know, in my late teens. I was still working with him and helping him out at the store. And I just there was no money in it for me. It wasn't enough, a lot of work, hard work. And I remember we were unloading the truck of one of the wine grapes, and I was getting stung by yellow jackets because they like the sugar from the grapes and the bees. And I was getting nails going right through the gloves. When you're taking off the boxes, you're lifting up 40-pound boxes, right, piling them up 7 high. So I said, I just started in it was probably one of my first deals I did with the marijuana business, but I said, Dad, I'll be back, and I left. And I left for about an hour. I sold a guy, 10 pounds of weed and made $400 a pound. I made $4,000. I was back in an hour, and I made $4,000. And probably working for him, I would have made probably $400 for an entire 80-hour week. So pretty much then I was on the streets, and I ended up just hustling streets. Anything I could do on the street to make money, I did. Anything, no matter what it was. And then it gets you around our local wise guys in the area. They hear stories. You're violent. You're always fighting. You're getting in trouble. You're making, and now they hear you're making money, so they want you around them. And that's pretty much how I got started with them.
Okay, and at that point, even at that age, Al Bruno was already pretty much the guy in your area, right? As far as controlling everything in your area.
No, he was a big figure. He was a powerful figure, but he wasn't the guy. He was, when I was just starting off, he was just a soldier.
Oh, okay.
But he had a lot of influence. I mean, he was probably a soldier that had the most influence out of. Well, not really the most, but he had a lot of influence. He was around the Genovese Faction, who were the bosses after Big Nose Sam passed away in '84. The Genovese took over, and then Bruno was around them. So it was always, they always say he's the number 2 in command and this and that, and in the newspapers. But yeah, he had a lot of influence, but he wasn't the guy.
Okay, so when you got your feet more in depth in that life, were you always pretty much, not at the end, but up to that point, were you always with Al Bruno, or underneath Al Bruno as you progressed in organized crime?
So in them circles, you're on record, you get put on record. So when Bruno came home, and I just came home from prison in '91, and he had just come home from prison right around '91, and it was right around that time. We were both in and out of prison in the early '90s, and it was right around that time, '91, '92. He put me on record with him, meaning he wanted me to be with him in the rackets that they do. Meanwhile, loan shark and sports, numbers, all kinds of gambling, legitimate businesses. He wanted me to be on record with him. So, he put me on record with our boss, and that was in the early 90s. So I was with him for the whole decade, up until the early 2000s. I was on record with him on and on.
In 2003 is when you went up to New York and you became a maid guy, right?
Yeah, August 11th, 2003.
You actually were called up to New York for that. Like, can you just walk me through, like, what was the determining factor, of the Genovese family deciding to make you?
Right. So, the Genovese family, Bruno's part of the Genovese family, so you can either get made in two parts. You can get made in the Massachusetts faction, which guys do. If you're a young guy coming up and they want to make you, you can get made with the faction where you're from. Like, I'm from Springfield, Mass, so I could have got made with Springfield, Mass, faction of the Genovese. But you could also get made in directly with a boss in New York, where the family resides in. You can get made there. So this would take long conversation, but just to make it really short, this can go on all different directions, but
right.
What really did it, like, I was a big earner. I had a big crew with me, and the bottom line is we were capable. We were capable of violence. We were capable of making lots of money, and it got noticed by the bosses in New York, and so they and like I said, I'm fast forwarding the story, but they said they wanted me to do a piece of work, which is kill a guy, and it was in New York City.
Right.
So me and two of my friends went down, and we shot a guy that was the head of the union, and this happened like in late April, early May of 2003. So we shot the head of the union, one of the head of the unions in New York City. I never even knew who the guy was. It was New York ordered me to do it. Right. And then I got made in August of 2003. So because I went down, and because of the build-up, I was a big earner. I had a big crew. We had a vicious crew, and we were capable of murder. We were capable of, we controlled everything in our area. So when I went down there and shot the guy, I was all set. That's how I got made in New York. I got made in New York, in the Bronx, and it's a big difference than getting made if I was to get made under the faction that's in Massachusetts, because I'm direct now with bosses that are they control the whole family. So so when I if there's a boss in Massachusetts, he's really a captain in the family, but he's recognized as a boss in this whole area in Massachusetts, throughout Connecticut, all the way going into Albany. He's a boss. Like, if they write about him in the newspaper, they call him a boss. He's recognized by street guys as a boss, but really he's a captain. So by me getting made in New York, I was, I had that power of being direct with bosses, which gave me the power of have more power than any of the guys in my area, because I was made directly in New York.
But if you're made in Springfield, would that be recognized by the other families as being a maid member?
Yeah, you can't get made without getting still the blessing of New York, of the family. I mean, you still have to get, you still have to be proposed, you still have to, it has to go to the bosses, they have to okay it. Right. But it's a lot different. I mean, you have
more connections, right? Direct.
Yeah, when it comes to national notoriety, I mean, you get more by saying, yeah, I'm with New York, saying, I'm with 106th Street, 16th Street, with the guys over there. I'm with the West Side. They consider that in New York, rather than saying, I'm in Massachusetts. You just get more by on a national scene also, and the local scene too. Wherever you go, you're representing bosses from New York. You're not representing them in the Mass. So you're pretty much already over, have more power than they do around my area.
Like you said, you have more direct resources. Yeah. How did the ceremony go down?
It's basically what everybody sees in a lot of the movies that they portray it, but you're not supposed to know that you're getting made. They tell you that you're made. So I went to the restaurant, and then we went to the apartment building. And, same thing. There's like 4 or 5. There's 2 bosses sitting down. There's 2 captains there. There's a gun and a knife on the table. And you just swear your allegiance. You take an oath. The organization that you're joining comes first before anything. If your wife is pregnant and we call for you and you have to leave, we'll call for you when you come. If we ask you to kill, they ask you, will you kill? You say yes. They say, well, prick the finger that you pull the trigger with. And they prick your finger, blood comes out, they put it on some paper, and they light it on fire, and then you repeat after them an oath, and another betray this. So there's a gun and knife on the table, and it's like a quick thing. It's like 10 minutes.
Right.
You're done. They come up, they hug you, they kiss you on the cheek. They say, hello, friend, because we call each other friends. It's like these friends of ours.
Right.
You're a friend now.
Absolutely.
So they go, hello, friend, and they give you a kiss, and basically that's it. I mean, I was it's a 10-minute process.
And I remember talking to you in previous conversations and stuff where, back in the day, that was such a, an ultimate pinnacle in guys' lives to hit that point. But in this day and age, it's almost like puts an immediate target on you. You know what I mean?
Well, another thing they don't want too is they don't want they tell you if you deal drugs or with counterfeit money, you forfeit your life. And I actually dealt with both. I made drugs my whole life, and I actually had a lot of dealings with counterfeit money and this and that. But yeah, they say if you deal with counterfeit money or drugs, you forfeit your life. So that was a rule also that they made sure that you knew about. You never mess with someone else's girlfriend, or that can get you killed also. Right. Or wife or anything like their family member.
And of course, as you're swearing allegiance to all of this stuff, in the back of your head, like, damn, all these rules are being broken by everybody.
Right. I mean, number one rule is you're not going to kill your brother if they tell you that. Pretty much, if your wife's having a baby, my daughter was born the next day after I got married, so it was kind of close. That would have been maybe one of the rules that I could have said, well, I already did that, but my wife's giving birth right now because she gave birth to my daughter August 12th, and I got married August 11th, so that was kind of close.
Right.
So maybe I would have broke that rule if they told me to come down August 12th at 11, and I probably would. I don't know. I probably still would have got married.
So, and who was the acting boss of the family at that time when you did become a maid guy?
Well, so at the time there was this guy who was the boss of the. They were using 3 bosses, and one of the guys was going to prison for 5 years, and he put this guy in his place. So the guy that he put in his place was Artie Magro, and he went from a soldier to a boss just like overnight. I know the other bosses weren't happy about it. They didn't want him in that position. I don't think they had their own reasons, but I think they were right about those reasons. So yeah, it was Artie. Artie became my boss of me.
Okay. But I mean, as far as the overall family boss, who was the acting boss at that time?
Well, Artie was the acting boss.
Oh, he was the acting boss.
Well, there was there's a history of it. They had, a boss. The Chin was the boss, and then,
right.
He would, and a lot of times they put up, fake bosses, and,
right.
So they would draw a lot of the attention. I mean, they never really tell you. I mean, the guys that are made and that are on the top level of the family know everything, but still, the soldiers got to know who's giving the orders and who to follow. So when you're within the family, you're made, you pretty much know what they're doing, and a lot of times, so there's not a lot of exposure. They use 3 different bosses for different areas. Like, one might have the Bronx and, let's say, Massachusetts, which is what Artie was doing. Another one might have New Jersey and some part of New York, and another one might have Manhattan. And, so taking one down and putting one off. They're using, maybe then go back to one, and he's got a street boss that's giving all the orders to these top 4 captains, and which is smart. They do everything the smart way, and that's why they're still the most powerful family. They're all pretty much out there,
Right, yeah, you definitely do not hear near as much on the Genovese family of guys, like big bust where they're, gathering up tons of guys. They're they've kind of stayed true to their roots of operating underground, and doing things that are very,
they're very
covert.
They're like they're what an organized crime family is supposed to be about. I mean, it's why they call it organized crime. It's about not some just street gang bunch of thugs running around. It's about controlling legitimate businesses, controlling trying to get the unions and control them. I mean, it's trying to get like what it used to be, a second government. A government within a government, and that's how that family is. They have to. That's why they're still intact. I mean, that's why they're still powerful.
Yeah, I would say, just knowing from my interviews and research and, externally, that it seems like that they are the family that have been able to continue, for the most part, in the way that they've always operated. You know what I mean?
Right. That comes from secrecy within the secrecy, and that came from good leadership throughout the years, and different tactics than other families did. When it comes to their underlings giving up money and choking them and doing all grimy stuff, you never really saw that in this family.
Do you think, with you being made, that they were ultimately positioning you to, for when Bruno got removed, for you to basically fill that void? Do you think that was all kind of part of it as well?
So the whole 100, that's exactly what it was. And Bruno wasn't even going to get killed. What their whole plan was try to, and this is how you survive. You want to stay, 10 steps ahead of the government. So Bruno was a big figure, powerful figure in our area.
Right.
And they were gonna take him down, which means demote him down to a soldier. They were gonna put this other soldier in his place as the captain of the Massachusetts branch of the Genovese family. So now you see what you're doing is you're putting this guy up as a kind of like so he gets all it's like the electricity when you put it up and it gets hit by the lightning. He gets all that attention, but he's going to be recognized as the new boss of our area. And what they're doing is they're making me direct with New York, and the guy that they're putting up as the puppet. I mean, I tell him what to do. So that's exactly what they did. They orchestrated it so I had all the power, but I was sheltered and I was protected, so the government wouldn't know that I had all the power.
Right.
And,
so it was almost like a smaller scale of how they ran things up in New York. You have the actual boss, but then you have another guy that's kind of publicly titled the boss to divert the attention to him, and so in a way,
we were doing it in our right. It's a good plan, because even after I got made, I never was introduced as a made guy to the guys in the Massachusetts crew. So I was never introduced as, hey, he's a friend of ours. And the reason that was because they wanted to protect me from any exposure to, with so many informants running around, and so, and they would have found out in not even a half of a day that I was the guy with all the power and everything. So they just wanted to make it where I had less exposure from law enforcement, and I had the biggest crew. I was the guy that had all the legitimate businesses and all the street businesses. So I mean, obviously you want to protect me, and when it comes to the exposure from the federal government and the local organized crime task force, state, local, and all that.
Ultimately, on paper, as far as New York was concerned, you were the boss of that area. I mean, if you
Yeah.
yeah,
I was the boss of this area, but undercover.
right.
In other words, we didn't want it, but they still wrote about it. I mean, they still did articles in the newspapers. They called me the reputed boss.
Right.
They called me Bruno's successor. They did all kinds of. It was on the news just about every single week, and they would put pictures of the old boss. They take him down, and they put my picture up, and I'm the new boss. So even though we did all that, it really didn't work because the local media and all the agencies were, they didn't know for sure, but the local media was running with that I was the boss.
Right. Well, yeah, of course they have sources and the investigative journalists. That you'd be surprised what the media can figure out.
Right.
So for the most part, in our previous talks and stuff, you were telling me that everything was running smooth for decades up there in Massachusetts. Like, what ultimately led to it being targeted more heavily by the feds? I mean, was it the extortions and the other things that kind of started getting brought into it in the end?
So what we said earlier about Artie becoming a boss from a soldier.
Right.
So that right there was bad move number one.
Right.
Okay. And number two, Artie had this guy around him named John Bologna, and he was like a messenger. He was like a liaison to New York and Mass. And what he would do was, this is when Bruno was boss, he would come and give messages between New York and Mass. So Artie and another, he was a high-ranking captain. I think he was supposed to get the position as boss instead of Artie, but instead Artie got it. So they would send this guy up, and I originally met him in 2001. Never liked him. First instincts, I said, this guy is not I don't like this guy. He had black sunglasses. He had a beard. He had a beard. He was like 6'4". He was 300 pounds. Black suit, black sunglasses. And this was at night at a restaurant. And so, anyways, they put me with this guy, and we had to go get some money from this some guy that owed them money in New Haven, Connecticut. So we ended up meeting, and then ever since then, it went from that meeting to a meeting every single week, and every weekend he was coming up. And Bruno at the time, and I think this was so back to the empire. This area was an empire. This area had every single thing that you could imagine covered, whether it was legitimate businesses to street businesses, politicians, whatever they wanted, they got, and they had it all. And as me coming up, I was getting it at the later end of it, but I was getting it all. And you had everything: nightclubs, strip clubs, bars, restaurants, garbage businesses, garbage business, the vending businesses, sports, the loan track. Everything. Even drugs. We had all the when it came to marijuana, we were controlling the whole area. So the downfall of everything was already becoming boss, putting this guy John around them, and then they started with these extortions, and that never really happened in this area. Nobody ever you extorted like bookmakers and loan sharks and people that were renegades, that drug dealers. You go after them and do whatever you can. You rob them, make them pay every week. Those are you do whatever you want. But the guys that their fathers grew up with our fathers, and everyone knew each other, and then you go into their business and you say, hey, you got to start paying us $500 a week. It's more insulting. Like, for instance, this one guy, you go to him and you ask him for $500 a week. All right, so that's $26,000 a year. But if you went to the guy and you said, hey, listen, I got a business. It's going to cost us $2 million to buy this business. He would have put up the $2 million and gave you 50% of the business. So you're getting $26,000 a year to start with, where in the other part you would have been partners in a business that the guy put up $2 million for you. And so what happened was it caused a lot of dissension in our area, and the organized crime task force came down really hard on it. There was just a lot of heat. So that combined Artie being boss, putting this guy John around, and then this guy John ends up being an informant. We get found by the Gambino family boss at the time. Tells Artie, I was in the car in the Bronx with Artie, and he tells us, they said, "What's JB doing here? This guy's no good. You guys got to get this guy out of here. He's away from you guys." And so I asked Artie about it afterwards. He said, "Don't pay no mind to it. They're just mad that the guy's around me now." And with that, another captain in the Patriarcha family said, Rico Petrillo, he was a good guy, and he said that the guy that comes up to your area with the beard is an informant. And both guys were right. The guy was an informant. And,
so you had two different families telling you that.
Yeah. So combine that and the shakedowns, and then, that's what pretty much was the doom of this area, which I believe that, and everybody, if you talk to anybody that grew up in my era and above, from, in the late 40s and up, I mean, everybody knew what this area was about. I mean, they controlled every single thing from that I can definitely go back to the 50s on, maybe even, I would say even more than that. And like I said, Artie became boss. He puts this guy around him. Next thing you know, they start with the extortions. And yeah, so that was the demise, I would say, the downfall of what I said was an empire in this area.
So, and for people who are confused, the Genovese faction was Western Mass, and the Patriarcha family was in Eastern Mass, right?
The Genovese family outside of New York was Connecticut, all the way down to, Stamford, Bridgeport, New Haven, Hartford, all the way into Mass, and then Mass all the way into going up towards Eastern Mass, more Western Mass, towards Albany. And so Albany touches the furthest point of Western Mass. So that whole area right there up until Central Mass, where Worcester is. Worcester is like a bigger city in that, and that was controlled by Genovese family. Now the Patriarcha family is based out of Providence, and that family controls Providence, Eastern Mass, and they also had a big presence in the Connecticut area, in the late, up until like the early '90s, and then they all kind of got hit with a big record. But there's still guys out there with the Patriarchas, but they're smart. They just stay under the radar.
Right. They're kind of like, and that was another thing I was going to ask, since it seems like their family kind of operated, obviously a smaller scale, but operated kind of like the Genovese family in that way. Did y'all ever have any major conflicts with them being in such a close proximity, or not?
No, with me personally, we always got along great with them. I know that there was wars that were going on amongst their own inner family. I mean, I was friends with both factions on both sides. That we'd go to Boston and we'd meet one faction, and they were talking about how they wanted to kill this other faction, and then the next week we go meet the other faction, and they're saying how they're going to kill the other faction. I mean, these are serious captains in that family. I mean, these guys were, I did a lot of time in state prison and everything, and these guys have a notorious reputation as dangerous guys, and both sides were looking to, kill each other. And plus, they had internal fights throughout their whole, from the 80s. They had fights, and it kind of led to guys in the Genovese family getting involved. They ended up killing the underboss of the Patriarcha family, and a guy from our area who was made with the Patriarchas killed him, but he was also with members of the Genovese family. That when they killed him, they all actually went to prison for that murder. So yeah, there was a lot of beef, and then there was beef. They had this guy Billy Grasso, who was a psychopath. I mean, a real gangster, and he was the underboss of the family. And when he was based out of New Haven, so he had more of a presence around us because New Haven's only an hour away, and he was in Hartford a lot. Where he had that crew in Hartford, and lots of beefs going on between the bosses in our area and Billy Grasso and him. There was always a lot of sit downs. It never got. One time it got a little bit where there was you could say it was about to become someone getting killed over it, like a war maybe started. But announced that because bosses in New York and the boss in Providence would always settle all that before anyone ever had gotten killed. But there was fights back in the late 80s and 90s over the vending business and, territories with sports gambling and stuff like that.
Right, so it ultimately get worked out through sit-downs before there'd be any bloodshed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because, the bosses, these guys would never go and kill a patriarchal guy without going to the bosses in New York. I mean, the boss here, Skyball, he used to go to New York and complain that, can you talk to Billy Grasso for us? He'd go to the bosses in New York, his bosses, and have them reach out to Billy Grasso, who was the underboss of the patriarchs, and try to tell him to, can you just try to settle things between us and this, that, and the other. So, it was pretty much like that.
Right. Do you think there's much activity, as far as mob activity today in Massachusetts, or,
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Well, in Boston, forget it. There's they're all intact there. There's a big crew there.
Right.
But, everybody is smart. If you could have got through that, the 80s and 90s, because that's when murders happened up in the early 2000s. If you could have got through there and not got hit with a murder beat that just did your 5 years, today, everybody's smart today. They're not, instead of killing a guy, they just, they chase them and they stay on the street. They might get hit with a racketeering case and they go to jail for 2 or 3 or 4 years or 5 years or 6 years. Who cares? It's nothing. And you got, you still come out and you got all the money. And that's what everybody is doing today. You don't control the streets as much. You don't dominate the streets like they did up until like the early 2000s or late 90s. But still they get to stay on the streets instead of doing life in prison.
Right. All right, Anthony. I'll be in touch with you really soon, buddy.
Mike, good talking to you. Have a good night.
Appreciate it.
All right.
See ya.
Yeah.